Good evening. I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is my weekly internet show. Nice to be here with y'all. I want to talk to you tonight about the magnitude of the battle that we're facing here as libertarians, the nature of this battle, what it involves. It's critical. I mean, it's impossible to overstate the potential consequences of this battle that we're in against against statism in this country. Ludwig von Mises many years ago was talking about this battle because it's been going on obviously for decades, and he said that in this battle, no one can stand aside with unconcern. I mean, everybody's got a stake in this thing, and therefore it's in everybody's interest to throw himself into this battle in one way or another. It's a battle that involves moral principles, economic principles. It involves our freedom, especially with respect to economic liberty and civil liberties. It really involves the future well-being of yourself, your family, your friends, your acquaintances, everyone in the country. And the battle is on because the statists are not letting up at this point. I mean, everywhere you look, the statist program is in crisis. And I've said this on this show before. I mean, any statist program you look at, Social Security, busted, right? It's bankrupt. It's a straight confiscate from the young and transfer money to the old. That's all it is, just a transfer program. Same with Medicare. Same with Medicaid, food stamps, farm subsidies, aid to dictatorships, foreign aid. The whole thing is in crisis. Look at their wars: the war on immigrants, the war on drugs, the war on illiteracy. Their grandiose public school projects with being funded by the federal government. It's a socialist program, as all these are. Socialistic programs or interventionist programs. And then there's the imperialist programs, the giant military establishment, the CIA, the national security state. Everywhere you look, the thing is cracking apart. And we all know that, what they're doing to fund this monstrosity, what we call the welfare warfare state, is bankrupting the country. I mean, slowly but surely, or maybe quickly but surely. But surely it is. And we got a glimpse of that with respect to Greece, where the government has bankrupted the nation. And we see it here in this country, with various cities going bankrupt with overspending and over debt. And that's where the federal government's head in this country. But it's not just the government, and that's what we need to keep in mind. It's actually the system that they have put into place, the statists. It's a philosophy of statism that they have engrafted onto our constitutional order. And that's what they did. I mean, it started out at the turn of the 19th into the 20th century, where the battle was being taken place between, individualists or libertarians against the progressives. That's what they called themselves at the time. But they were really the socialists and the interventionists. I mean, they were taking their ideas from the German socialists. That's where Social Security came from. That's where Medicare came from. That's where public schooling came from. And the American socialists were taking these ideas from their counterparts among the socialist community in Germany and elsewhere around Europe, and they were trying to import these ideas. Now, for Americans at that time, the libertarians, the individualists, they just laughed, because they figured they didn't have a chance. And you can imagine, there was much room for despondency among the progressives, because here they were in the late 1800s, trying to bring in their socialism and interventionism and their imperialism as well to a society in which there was no Social Security, no income tax, no Medicare, no Medicaid, no immigration controls, no drug war, no systems of public schooling. I mean, it was, okay, it's not a perfectly free society in the late 1800s. There was the railroad grants, and there was, many instances of, government subsidies to the railroads or wherever. And then you had regulations at the state and local level. But But this was a unique society, without Social Security, Medicare, income tax thing. Americans could keep everything they earned. And there wasn't anything the government could do about it because it could not levy taxes on income. And then you had sound money. You had gold and silver coins as the official money. Now, you know what the statists say about the gold standard. They say, oh, well, that meant there was a certain amount of paper money backed by gold. Nonsense. That's not what it meant. There was no paper money. They rejected paper money, our American ancestors did. The gold standard was that gold and silver coins were the official money of the United States. And, the result of this was a tremendously wealthy, prosperous society. Oh, by the way, it was also the most charitable society in history. When people were free to accumulate unlimited amounts of wealth, they gave away large amounts of wealth. And that's how the universities and the museums and the rest of the things, churches, that's how they got built. Through voluntary action, voluntary donations, and not because of an income tax deduction, because there was no income tax. So the progressives come in, they must have felt a little bit despondent, saying, how do we ever overcome this? I mean, how do we ever convince Americans of our statist ideas and what was their philosophy? Their philosophy was, hey, no more do you get to accumulate unlimited amounts of wealth. You must be forced to be good. The government must force everyone to be good. We must get involved with equalization of wealth, where the government takes money from one group of people in order to give it to another group of people. And then you had the interventionist society where, where the government intervenes in economic affairs, starts regulating things. This was examples. This was maximum hour legislation, the 40-hour work week or the 60-hour work week. You had price controls, minimum wage laws, the whole gamut of regulations that were supposedly designed to help the poor and so forth. And then, of course, you had the imperialism. And that was, began in 1898 with the Spanish-American War, where the U.S. government comes and says, well, we're here we're gonna help the Cuban people achieve their independence from the Spanish Empire, and the same for the Filipino people. And of course, it was all a ruse to take control over Cuba and the Philippines and dominate them and control them. In other words, the beginning of the American Empire and in substitution for the Spanish Empire. And of course, so began the 100 and some odd years of obsession over Cuba, which as we see much of that later on with the national security state and trying to assassinate Fidel Castro and claiming that the communists were coming to get us and all this nonsense. But it all begins in 1898. So you've got the statists bringing in the socialism, you got them bringing in the imperialism and the interventionism. And sure enough, just through the power of ideas, it was amazing. Through the power of ideas, they were able to garner support from a critical mass of Americans that finally just shifted America into this entirely new direction of the welfare warfare state. And so you have this, graduated income tax, one of the 10 planks in the Communist Manifesto. You can Google it. Just Google 10 planks Communist Manifesto. You'll see there, graduated income tax. Also, they make it illegal to own gold and silver, which had been the official money of the United States, the money under the Constitution. They made felons out of Americans for owning it. And they've got a Federal Reserve system at this point, printing paper money, the decades of inflation, of monetary debasement. And so we end up with just irredeemable paper money. They still say Federal Reserve note, but they don't promise to pay anything. It's just irredeemable paper. And then you've got the entire welfare state, with the crown jewel being Social Security, the Medicare system, the Medicaid system, the farm subsidies, the aid to dictatorships, the aid to whoever. And then you got the drug war, which was really, clearly reflected the mindset of the statist, that we control you in this government. We control the individual, which is no longer an individual. You're a cog in this system. and you will eat what we tell you to eat. You will ingest what we tell you to ingest. And so it doesn't just stop with illicit drugs or whatever. If they say you're not going to eat fatty foods, if they say you're not going to drink sugary drinks, then you're not going to do it, or you're going to be guilty of a criminal offense. And so this was the ultimate manifestation of the statist philosophy: is we control what you do in the privacy of your own home. And then you end up with this gigantic, military-industrial complex, standing army. Of course, after the Spanish-American War, you got World War I, which was a total waste of American life. But it was that imperialist mindset of, we're going to intervene in Europe's wars, and we're going to finally settle this. This will be the war to end all wars. This will be the war to make the world safe for democracy. And, tens of thousands of American men just died for nothing, because it was just really part one, and part two comes in World War II, which, came about because of American intervention in large part, because the American intervention precluded the possibility of a negotiated peace in World War I. It was total victory over the Germans. The Treaty of Versailles comes into play, a vindictive treaty, but which gave rise to the conditions where, horrible economic conditions in Germany. They give rise to Hitler. Hitler makes a huge deal out of the Treaty of Versailles. All of a sudden, you've got World War II. And then it doesn't stop there. Then all of a sudden you end up with the national security state. They said, no, it's not sufficient to beat the Germans. Now we have to go after our, World War II partner and ally, the Soviet Union, because they're going to come and attack us. Well, the Soviet Union, I forget what the number is, they had lost 60 million people or so. I mean, they weren't quite in a position to go after anyone. But boy, the national security state sure said so. Well, of course, that justifies their existence. The giant military establishment, ever-growing budgets, standing army in violation of what the Founding Fathers had said, a CIA that President Truman said soon after the Kennedy assassination, I think it was like 30 days later, said that the CIA had become a dark and sinister force in American life and in the life of international affairs. This was an agency whose mission was to assassinate and effect regime change and coups and torture, and all in the name of protecting national security. A term which has absolutely no meaning. It's not even in the Constitution. It's the most flexible, wide open door for government to take away people's liberties that anybody's ever come up with. It was brilliant. National security. What does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. But whenever they want to hide something or they want to do something, they want to do it in secret, they just cite national security and everybody rolls over, including the federal judges. They walk into a federal court and just say, national security, Your Honor, or state secrets, and judicial doctrine that's not even in the Constitution either. Federal judges just start quivering and quaking, and they get all nervous, and they say, case dismissed, or no, we have to, go, we can't do anything here, it's national security is a state. It's ridiculous. But that's what we're living under, and all of this system has produced the situation where we are today, where there's out of control spending, out of control debt. They're spending $1.3 trillion more than what they're bringing in. And you've got, I don't know, how much do people owe per capita now? Close to $60,000 a person. That's debt that actually the government owes. And the only way it can repay that debt is by taxing you. There's just no other way. And that comes as a revelation to people sometimes. They think that, the federal government has its own money. It's like any other business, that the federal government and IBM and Apple, they're all just part of this economy and they're all players in the economy. Not so. You've got the government sector and the private sector. The private sector produces the wealth. The government sector comes and seizes the wealth from the private sector and then does whatever it's going to do with it. And so you've got government confiscating large amounts of money. And keep in mind that the level of taxation is not what they're collecting. It's what they're spending. That's the real level of taxation. Milton Friedman pointed that out. Look at how much they're spending, because that money has to come from someplace. And they go out and borrow the difference, And that debt has to be paid back. Now, when I was in college, economics professors, most of whom were statists, they said, oh, the national debt doesn't matter because we owe it to ourselves. See that we, that collective, because they look at America as like a beehive where all the drones are working, for the greater good of the hive. And so they say, oh, we owe it to ourselves. Well, as an individualist, as a libertarian, we know that's nonsense. The government owes money to certain individuals. They're the bondholders. And those bondholders demand to be paid. And so the government at some point's got to confiscate wealth and repay it. And that's what you're on the hook for. Every one of us is on the hook for. Oh, and it's worse than that. It's not just that debt. There's all these unfunded entitlements that are coming due, like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. And as I said last week, they don't include this on the balance sheet because their position is it's not really an obligation. It's not like a debt that they owe. They could repeal these welfare state programs, and nobody could sue. Nobody could say, "Oh, wait, no, I've got a contract. I put it in. I got a right to take it back." No, none of that exists. It never has. This is just things that people have made up, and they've convinced themselves of it, but it has no basis in reality. And that's why these unfunded liabilities are not on the balance sheet. But assuming they keep these programs in effect, and there's every reason to think that they're going to, the amount of money that must be confiscated from the private sector is much larger than just the straight national debt itself. So this thing's out of control, and we've all got a stake in this outcome because let me tell you what statists are saying. I mean, you can read any mainstream newspaper, their editorial page. They're saying the way out of this is to continue spending. The way out of this is to continue borrowing. They're talking about, this fiscal cliff. I mean, of all the nonsense. I mean, the best thing you could ever do is knock off $1.3 trillion, okay? The difference between what they're spending and what they're bringing in, not counting entitlements, just 1.3 trillion, slash the spending. If that means you got to get out of Afghanistan a year early, fine, great. It'd be the best thing that ever happened to the soldiers, the people of Afghanistan, and everybody else, especially us. Close military bases, whatever it takes, slash welfare state benefits, whatever it takes, the best thing they could ever do is knock off $1.3 trillion immediately, okay? But the statists won't let that happen, man. They say, oh, no, that would be horrible. There'd be unemployment. There'd be chaos and whatever. I mean, you kind of see this. Well, a good example of this phenomenon was after World War II, where you had, massive numbers of people working for the government in the military sector. And they said, oh, what should we do now? And they said, well, let's just lay them off. Lay off all the soldiers, put them in the private sector. And the statists were saying, no, oh my gosh, massive unemployment. No, we can't do this. Well, it's ridiculous. Those in the public sector are a burden on the private sector. Once you lay them off, that burden is relieved where now you've got a lot of economic opportunities appearing in the private sector that then hire these people that are coming off of the public sector. And they become productive. They're not just going left face, right face, or filling out bureaucratic forms or whatever. They now are producing wealth. So it's a doubly positive effect. The statists have it diametrically opposite. The statists say, no, just keep hiring more people in the federal government. Jobs programs, put people to work, build highways and whatever. It's ridiculous because all they're doing is placing a bigger financial burden on the private sector. And the private sector is the key to rising standards of living. That's where your wealth is produced. To take an extreme example, if you look at Cuba, we're up to recently, like 99% of the people work for the state. And it's a totally socialist nation. And of course, we libertarians, if they said what's the solution to this, we'd say lay off about 98% of them and liberate them, free them to accumulate wealth, engage in economic enterprise. Well, the statists here in America would go ape over that. Oh, no, that would cause unemployment. You can't do that. Well, sure enough, the Castro brothers are liberalizing some of the economy now. Perhaps you've read about it. It's kind of interesting. They're letting people buy and sell cars and I think homes too and start their own businesses, but they can't hire anybody because that would be capitalism. And so immediately a lot of economic enterprises popping up, but there's all these distortions because the state still controls like the transportation business. So, a farmer can produce some nice crops, but if you can't get them to market, so you still got these distortions that are taking place. But the idea is that the more that public sector shrinks, the greater the prosperity of people. You see this in China, which, American statists consider a threat or a rival because it's getting powerful. Well, all it's doing is liberalizing its economy. It's still a socialist country, but by and large, compared to where it was 20 years ago, it's incredible because it's freed up a large sector of society to accumulate wealth. They still got the state-controlled businesses and so forth. But this is the statists here in this country are not letting up. They're saying spend more, borrow more, and inflate more, because that's where the Federal Reserve comes into this whole little statist story. Is that when the debt starts getting larger and larger, and they've done this over the decades, ever since 1913 when the Federal Reserve came into existence. When the debt gets too large, guess how they decide to start paying it off? No, not by raising taxes, because that gets people mad and they can throw out incumbents. They start doing it through this fraudulent, secret, surreptitious method known as inflation. And they always blame it on the people that are raising their prices. Oh, the OPEC or whip inflation now. They're going after gas station owners and other people raising their prices. It's so ridiculous, but it works because the standard person that comes out of public schools, he doesn't know. He thinks inflation is like the flu. It just sort of strikes nations willy-nilly. Well, it's not like the flu. This is deliberate federal government policy that is initiated through the Federal Reserve System, the central bank. And this is not the only government that does this. Other governments do it. Zimbabwe is a good example. They inflated their currency a while back. But the statists say this is the way to get your prosperity going. Prime the pump, stimulate the economy, print some money. And what they're trying to do is pay off their debts by just printing the money. You see, they don't have to go out and tax it. They just start printing it. Well, that just debases the value of the currency. And it distorts the markets, especially the capital markets. That's how these little bubbles start. Like in the housing market, you got these interest rates artificially lowered through the Federal Reserve. That sends out a signal that, oh my gosh, there's people that want homes because now they can afford them and so forth. But it's a false signal. People don't have the wealth to justify this. But yet you have an entire sector responding to this signal. And then when the bubble bursts, they go out and blame the housing market or the banking market or whatever, because they cannot face that it's their beloved system of statism that has failed. And so everywhere you look, you've got all these programs in disaster. Look at foreign affairs. I mean, they invade Iraq. They say, oh, this is going to bring peace to the Middle East. We're going to get rid of Saddam. Yeah, all they've accomplished in Iraq, they won't talk about this, but it's true. All they've accomplished is the installation of a pro-Iranian regime. Now, I ask you, if you were given the opportunity to give your life in the service of your military in order to install a pro-Iranian regime, would you do it? I mean, we all know Iran's governed by a dictatorship. Why is that anything to die for? Why is that anything to lose your arm for, your leg, or your brain for, or whatever? And yet that's what American soldiers did. They went in there and they killed people in a war of aggression against a nation that had never attacked the United States, never even threatened to. They died. Many of them died. They got maimed to install a pro-U.S. a pro-Iranian regime. That is a dictatorship. I mean, the dictatorship in Iraq is no different from the Saddam Hussein dictatorship. It's exactly the same. I mean, they all come out of the same mindset. I mean, and so, this is a perfect example of U.S. foreign policy. Afghanistan, they're over there killing and fighting and dying in order to keep a crooked, corrupt, fraudulent regime into power because it's pro-U.S. And it hasn't been elected because an election that's based on fake and false ballots is not an election. And so there's another disaster there. You can look at the whole Middle East. I mean, look at what's going on in Egypt. You've got this dysfunctional system where a man that's democratically elected is just now, declared himself dictator. And you've got lurking in the background this gigantic military establishment that is similar to ours over here that says we're above it all. We maintain order and stability, and we're in ultimate control. And it turns out, I read over the weekend, that Morsi, the president, that when he's proposing this new constitution, that he cut a deal with the military, giving them everything they wanted, where they maintain their total ultimate control. They don't have to answer anybody. Their budgets are secret. The ultimate power is with this military dictatorship, and which, by the way, also controls the courts over there. And so you've got this huge dysfunctional system, and nobody knows where this thing's going to come out. But what's important is that it's the U.S. government that's funneled the money that supported and established this system. They've been funneling money into this military dictatorship for decades. A dictatorship that where the military has the power to round up civilians, put them in torture centers, execute them. I mean, it's just a bizarre, aberrant system. But it's a system that U.S. officials love. I mean, they love dictatorships because dictatorships keep order and stability as long as they're pro-U.S. If they're not pro-U.S., they don't like them. They don't like Chavez. They don't like Castro. They don't like Evo Morales in Bolivia because these are independent dictators. Now, sometimes there's an overlap. They loved Saddam Hussein. They supported him. They gave him weaponry and so forth. But then he went independent, and they didn't like him anymore. So they said, now we got to go in and oust him. And you see example after example of this. But yeah, the Shah of Iran they loved. They loved Musharraf in Pakistan, a military dictator. They loved Pinochet, military dictator. But here we are. Look at where we are as a country. This is a country whose government tortures people, assassinates people, kidnaps people. I mean, where does this fit in with our traditional American values? You know, that they say all this is necessary. Oh, it's been forced upon us. Well, only because they are the national security state. That it's that system, the vast military establishment, this military empire overseas, this CIA, what Truman called a dark and sinister force. They produce these conditions that then they say, oh, well, we got to protect you from these conditions. And then, of course, you've got the welfare state creating all this chaos and catastrophe and driving us slowly but surely into bankruptcy. Well, we can spend our lives trying to reform this and trying to make it work and trying to rein in the spending here and there, and rein in the military, and that's just nonsense. That's a waste of time. I mean, there's no sense in devoting your life to trying to make the welfare warfare state work because it can't work. It's inherently defective. And then right now, the statists are in control. There's no doubt about it. But you can't envy their position because while they're in control, look at the mess they're producing. Okay. Now they try to co-opt us libertarians, and they say, "Well, get involved with us and show us how to save the welfare warfare state. Jobs and growth and all this nonsense." Well, that's not what we libertarians are about. We're about freedom, and so we want to not reform the welfare warfare state, including the drug war. We want to dismantle these things. We want to dismantle the statism. In other words, we're in the position that the progressives were in the latter part of the 1800s, early 1900s. Now we're in the latter part of the 1900s into the 2000s. We want to overcome the statism. We want to get rid of the statism. And I know sometimes, people, libertarians say, oh, gosh, we don't have a chance. Nonsense. If the progressives had a chance, to change things to a worse direction, we've got a chance to restore things in terms of principles of freedom and build on what this country was originally all about. Unlimited accumulation of wealth. You decide what to do with your own money. No more drug war. Don't treat people in this abusive fashion. And open immigration, free trade. I mean, these are our principles that are consistent with the heritage of what this country was all about. And that's what we fight about. And make no mistake about it, despite the fact that the statists are still in control, they know they've produced a mess, and more Americans are waking up saying, this is a defective paradigm, a system, a framework, and that the libertarians are right here. We're right morally, because it's wrong to take what doesn't belong to a person. It's wrong to force people to be good. That's why we want to separate charity and the state. We believe in free will and freedom of choice, except with respect to, of course, the violent crimes, which should be crimes. But everything else, everything is peaceful, legalize it. And that's how we prevail, just through the power of ideas, by sharing ideas with others. By the way, you've seen our new website. We're excited. We're excited about this coming year. We think we're going to make some giant strides in the dissemination of ideas. We've got a great website. We've got new staff. Sheldon Richmond's joined us full time. He's now going to be editor of our monthly journal, Future of Freedom. And Bart Fraser and I will still be handling the FFF Daily. We had a new columnist come on, Steve Horowitz. He's going to be writing his column every other week on Thursdays. So we got a lot of exciting things happening. We still got our program with the students at George Mason. We're battling, okay? But we need your support. We can't do it without those of you that help us out. We're very, very grateful. We couldn't have done this website. We couldn't hire people without those of you that help us out. And if you can become a member of the Freedom Club, we'd be very, very appreciative. The Freedom Club is $250 above. We send you a little gift as a token of our appreciation. You get a monthly video message from me. But mostly it's just because you believe in what we're doing. And we need your support. So that's the show for this week. Thanks so much for tuning in. And you guys continue to have a great holiday season. Good night.